So thank you so much for being here today and for taking time out of your day to talk about how you practice yoga. When we've practiced together in the past, I know you've used a chair to do your practices. Can you tell me a little bit about what your practice looks like?
Oh, definitely. I mean, for me, using a chair makes most of the yoga postures more accessible. By that I mean like getting down to the ground and having to come back up is a challenge most of the time. And it gives me a greater range of motion that I'm capable to access when I'm already sitting up. So because I've always had to sort of modify my postures, I've gotten pretty good at figuring out if something isn't offered, what I can do while in a chair that kind of meets the equivalent range of body being involved in whatever the posture might be.
Right. And what kind of props do you ever use props to do your practice?
Yes, yeah. The rectangles, the
foam blocks.
Foam blocks. I usually have 2 of those. Truthfully, it would be better if I had 4, and that is because sometimes if we're doing like moves that involve bending forward, I'm often not getting fully to the ground, and so I use the blocks as something to be able to lean on so that I can put my hands down somewhere so that that's not the part that becomes the most difficult within the exercise.
Right. And I know we've kind of had to modify things in class before, like we've had a milk carton.
Yes,
as well.
yes. So having the chair is great, but you really do need to have something that you can put your legs on, because whenever you're doing a posture on the ground where you would stretch out your legs, because I'm in a chair, I don't want to have to hold my leg up into that position. That's rarely the point of it. So having a milk carton or another chair that's at a comparable height to the first one gives me the ability to do any of the positions where my legs might be stretched out.
So when you are looking for a space to practice in, or if you want to practice in a group, what do you look for in a space?
I guess the most important thing for me right now in COVID is like distance. One of the things with this particular location is that there are numbers, for example, that create separation, safe separation between people. I know that the regulations currently say once people are seated, we can unmask. My preference is still to stay masked in terms of my own health needs and comfort level. So I being in a space with people that share that level of concern brings a certain level of comfort. Also having an instructor that can offer modifications is very important, or at least one that is sufficiently aware that if I'm doing something different, that it's perfectly acceptable and welcome.
And if there's something that you wanted able-bodied teachers to know, or that they should maybe keep in mind to make their classes more accessible, what would you tell them?
I would say to have some conversations with the people that are living with disabilities before the class, so that it's not an uncomfortable thing in front of others, and so that if something that gets shared is something that they need to take some time and get some information about, that they have time to do their own processing. Because just like any issue where it isn't your lived experience, you don't want to put it on the person whose lived experience it is to have to bring you up to speed. Like, you have to be sufficiently invested to find out a bit on your own, because I'm not going to come to class knowing what the potential routine may be. I can only articulate what my body's needs are in relation to the exercise as it's mentioned and brought forward. So I'm constantly quickly thinking on my feet, because some of my disabilities and body needs shift. So I may not have range of motion to do arms above my head on one day, but it doesn't mean that I can't ever do arms above my head. or if it were at the very end of class that we were requested to be on the ground, that might be something that I may choose to participate in, because I knew I didn't need to miss 3 motions to get myself back up. So it really needs to be a flexibility to understand that it can bring some discomfort to have to articulate and share, and to also be sensitive to the fact that I may not want to share all of the particulars of my condition. I just want to share the piece that makes the class worthwhile. So I'm not going to give you, my origin story of disability. I may say, today I'm having difficulty with forward bends.
Right. And you mentioned something really important there, which is that the choice part of it, of having options available to you so that you can decide whether or not you want to go all the way down to the mat or you want to remain in your chair.
As an instructor, to not assume that everyone has equal familiarity with the things in the class, and so maybe just a little bit of time to say, hey, this bolster is available. It could be used for this or this. These blocks are available. You might use it for that or that, so that the things that I'm not familiar with, I'm being given options that I can then integrate into what my needs are. And that feeling of being left out, like when everybody's doing something that is completely inaccessible and having no option offered, and perhaps it's something so unfamiliar that I can't think up an option for myself, those are hard moments. And it's not enough to just say, this is an advanced class or this is a moderate class, because those terms really live within a range of ableism that assumes a certain ability of participation because of those terms. Those terms are not helpful at all for people living with disability. Those terms just presume things that should not be presumed, and it imposes upon you to assume that if you can't participate in this moderate class, that you are somehow less than. I am not a beginner at yoga, but I may have to choose a class that's beginner for not having the confidence to know if a particular instructor is going to carry enough sensitivity for me to be in a moderate or a termed advanced class.
Of course. And like you say, people could be practicing yoga for 10, 20 years, and just because they're not able to do a particular pose, or a pose doesn't work for them, or whatever's being offered doesn't work for them, it doesn't mean that they're not an advanced practitioner of yoga.
Definitely. And I think that reframing, like some instructors are wonderful at how they introduce the yoga practice to people. Some are not as skilled in that. And I think when the invitation is to include whatever your level of participation might be, people can find their way and can say, I need a little support here. I need a little support there. Like being able to, when I started the class here with you, I hadn't asked for the milk crate. And so during those positions, I was a little at a loss what to do, because it just wasn't available in the space at the time. But then once I brought that forward, all of a sudden a whole range of poses became available to me.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to be able to show folks how you practice yoga, just so people can see a different way of practicing yoga opposed to, being down on a mat for every single posture. How do you feel about?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, Siobhan, why don't you show me how you might do a posture like a forward fold?
Okay, so if I was trying to do a forward fold, I would usually have some of my blocks on hand, and that way when I go forward, I'm able to rest my hands and get as much stretch through my back as possible, sort of just keeping my head loose and wiggly. And so right now, in this way, I feel supported, and I also feel like I can stay in this posture and take, several breaths and really get to feel that sort of expansion through my lower back. Now, with having the crate here, if this stacking of the blocks was feeling unstable, I might just put the blocks on top of the crate to the level that I need to get that same sort of a fold. And that also gives me the ability to shift the level of stability and to also shift a little bit where I'm feeling like where if it was just your fingers touching and then maybe you would go to your hand being flat to get a little extra or to have a little less in terms of the stretch.
Right, so you can kind of meet yourself where you're at on any given day, depending on how many blocks you
Exactly. Normally, I wouldn't have a milk crate, so I'd be relying on the blocks. And when you put them on top of each other, it's not the most stable, but really that position isn't about moving my hands around a lot. So once I have them, especially if they're on a mat, so they're not going to slip, this feels pretty stable to me. If I had this on carpet or I had this on floor that was slippy, then this might not feel that stable for me. And then I might go for something different, like if I had a chair that had arms, I might use the arms of the chair as the thing that supports me in this position. So one of the things that I haven't mentioned as much so far is that in addition to being a body that lives with disability, I'm also a fat, tall-bodied person. And what that means is that often when poses ask for your legs to be in close to one another, or in any way a more restricted pose, I will usually need to widen the stance on those positions so that there's room for my upper body and tummy to be able to get into those postures. And that's something that often isn't thought of when the poses are offered to a group.
Okay, so if you were to do a posture like Paschimottanasana, for example, so with this I normally take my hands up and then I would forward fold towards my legs, but that would look a little bit different for your body.
Yes, definitely. So by putting something comfy on top of the milk crate or using another chair or a coffee table, I would put my legs up. And what's nice with this bolster is that it gives me a little bit of room. Truth is, this may not be enough room for this V to accommodate me going very far forward. But because it isn't about how far I bend, the important thing would be in this particular posture to not be rounding my shoulders, to just stay in the position and go as far forward as I could comfortably, which would likely mean my arms or my hands rather touching mid-calf as opposed to getting anywhere near my toes other than like pointing in their direction.
Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to share with folks who might be disabled and wanting to access yoga but are not sure if it's going to work for their body?
Well, I mean, I can say that I avoided yoga for a long time because of some negative experiences, either from fellow classmates or from instructors. And I had to come back to it slowly to feel welcome in the space, both from even just like the clothing that I felt was available to me to wear in the space. It didn't feel like that was available to me for my body type. And it also is something to know that, you know, just being able to find a comfortable position and from a chair, and let's say I wanted to do a twist, is that there are ways that you can adjust to really still feel the same range of activity, and that you're not losing anything from not being able to do the exact same pose as the other people in the class. Me personally, I like to sit at the back of the class, so I feel like I'm not being watched as much. And that's sort of like just a little, trick in terms of keeping my mental state positive. I also like to sit close to a door. and because I know my needs. So I would suggest for people to know what their needs are as best they can ahead of time, and ask for your needs to be met as the best way to get your needs met inside of whatever environment. And if it doesn't feel like it's available to you in that moment, at the beginning of class with everybody there, then find some time outside of class to have that conversation. Because, you know, not everybody wants to be on stage with the possibility of everybody chiming in with, I broke my leg once and here's what I did. Like, having something that is an occasional injury that passes is very different than living, as we know, with chronic pain or you know, various types of disabilities that may be invisible, but nonetheless affect what my range of motion may be. So, you know, the best thing I can say is know yourself and feel confident in asking for what you need, because you have as much right to the class and to having an enjoyable and useful experience as everyone in the class can do.
Thank you so much for all of this incredible wisdom that you've shared, your willingness to share, you know, what works for your body. You're just so full of information. I was so happy when you agreed to come out and help me with this project. So thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for so much. You always give back so much to community. So it was my pleasure to be able to come and participate in this with you.
Thanks so much, Siobhan.